I also want to take special time to acknowledge our university and community supporters, the University of Iowa International Programs and the University of Iowa's Honors Program. They contribute vital time, talent, and logistics to our organization. I also want to thank the Stanley Foundation Support Organization for their financial support, and thank today's special sponsors, U.S. Bank and Dave and Diane Martin. Our programs are made possible with these generous financial support of individuals and businesses. At this time, I want to introduce Jim Olson, who in turn will introduce our speaker, Todd J. Edwards.
Thank you, Sue. My name is Jim Olson. I am not only a member of the Iowa City Foreign Relations Council, but I am the president of the Iowa United Nations Association, which is a nonpartisan membership organization that engages Iowans in the work of the UN and advocates for constructive United States leadership in the world body. For 3 years now, the Iowa UNA has partnered with ICFRC to present a program on or near United Nations Day, which is October 24th. So I want to begin by thanking the Iowa City Foreign Relations Council for this partnership. We're very grateful for the opportunity to work with you and look forward to our continuing collaboration in the future. In addition to today's luncheon, which has a United Nations theme, there are 2 other events occurring this week in Iowa City related to the United Nations. There is a piece of paper on your table which describes these events. Tomorrow at 1 o'clock, Chris Watley, the National Executive Director of the United Nations Association, will be in Iowa City, and our campus chapter is hosting a presentation by him, once again at 1 o'clock in the Illinois room of the Iowa Memorial Union. All of you are welcome. And on Sunday, October 25th, we are celebrating the UN's 70th anniversary with a dinner at a restaurant called 126. Jim Leach, former congressman and current chair of public affairs at the University of Iowa, will be our speaker. I invite you to attend one or both of those events, and as I say, the details are printed on the paper on your table. This is the 70th anniversary of the United Nations, and this 70th anniversary year will conclude with a major international conference in Paris, which has the aim of completing a new international agreement to curb the emission of greenhouse gases. The formal name for this international conference is the 21st Conference of Parties to the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, so it is sometimes known as COP21 for short, or also known as the Climate Summit. We are fortunate to have today Todd Edwards, who has been closely monitoring the preparations for the Climate Summit. He is the program officer for climate change at the Stanley Foundation, where he focuses on improving all levels of global climate change governance. This work includes encouraging national governments to commit to curbing emissions and also building momentum for climate change action on the part of governmental units at all levels and also on the part of businesses and civil society. Todd has just completed a PhD in political science from the Vrije Universiteit Brussels, and he had a special focus on climate change governance in his work there. So please help me welcome Todd Edwards.
Hi, good afternoon, and thank you, Sue. Thank you, Jim. Really, it's an honor to be able to speak to all of you today, and so I thank the Iowa City Foreign Relations Council and Iowa UNA for having me here. If those of you who are not familiar with the Stanley Foundation, we're based in Muscatine. It's just around the corner, but we focus on global governance issues. So back in 1956, Max and Betty Stanley started the foundation. They had a keen interest on improving global citizenship, working on global peace and security, and enhancing global governance issues. So typically, I'm in front of an audience of international policymakers, having meetings in that type of regard, maybe not speeches in this same format, but, working in panels or in workshops and that type of thing. So I'm actually more nervous in this crowd because I actually have to bring things home and talk about what happens in Iowa City and what we can do and how it connects back to the international level. So I'm going to do my best, but I imagine that there are going to be some questions, and I will keep an eye on the time so that we make sure that we'll have some time for that. So as Jim was saying, there's this big conference that's going to be happening at the end of the year. This conference is COP21. It's going to be in Paris. There are all kinds of different ways you can talk about this conference, but we are expecting a new agreement, or the Paris Agreement. Or sometimes we just call it Paris and forget that Paris is a city because we're talking about an agreement. But that's what we mean by Paris, or what's going to happen, or what I'm going to talk about is after Paris. Paris, the city, it's not going anywhere, but things are going to be happening after Paris. So before I jump into this, I'll just give you a general outline of what I'm going to be talking about. So there's not a climax, there's not a moment of a aha. It's actually pretty simple. What's happening on the ground around the world, the ground-up action, a lot of bottom-up action from civil society, from cities, from regions, from communities, to universities, to local businesses, to bigger businesses, is what's really going to get us to where we need to be and send the right policy and market signals to policymakers so that we can be on a path toward a safe climate world. And a safe climate world is something that is still yet to be determined if it's 1.5 degrees Celsius or 2 degrees Celsius as a political target, but I think that we can all know by observations what we mean by a safe climate world. And there are a lot of parties that would say it should even be less than that 1.5 degrees. But what I'll show you here is that we need this bottom-up, this groundswell of climate action for us to even get to the 2 degrees, let alone getting to the 1.5. So in Paris, what's going to happen? Paris, they're looking at 4 different pillars, as they've been called. I think the international community might have moved away from the concept of pillars, but 4 different keys to success. An agreement, simple, maybe. National contributions to mitigation and resilience, scaling up of what some people call innovation, but it's actually a scaling up of cooperative actions. I'll talk about this. It's known as the Lima Paris Action Agenda. And then finally, scaling up of finance. There are a lot of other pieces that go into this agreement besides finance and the Lima Paris Action Agenda and the nationally determined contributions that we'll get into. But those are the pillars. Those are the keystones that we're really looking for, and that's what I'm going to focus on here. So, right. So this is what I was just talking about. But why is the presentation called Après Paris, or After Paris? Well, it's because there's still a lot to be landed in Paris, and there's a lot to be to Paris after Paris that needs to be taken off. And so I use an analogy that's not one of my own. It's an analogy that actually is used in the international community quite a bit about the landing of an agreement or the taking off of climate actions. And it's because the Paris COP is going to take place at the Les Bourget. Les Bourget is actually just outside of Paris. It's in between Charles de Gaulle Airport and the city center of Paris. But Les Bourget is actually an old airport. So it makes it so easy to use this analogy of, takeoff, runway, landing points. But what's being framed with that analogy is an overall narrative. We need to have a narrative. And that narrative is going to be, we already know what's basically going to happen in Paris, and what are we going to do next? What's after Paris? We want Paris to be seen as a success because it is a success, but it's not going to get us to where we actually need to go by itself. So what needs to happen after Paris? And we will take a look. So in Paris, well, I'll take a step back. In Paris, we need this agreement that I was talking about. This agreement is currently in draft form. What we have here is the draft text of the ad hoc working group on the Durban platform of enhanced action. It's kind of a long name. It's also, you can just call it the ADP. So this is the draft text of the ADP. The ADP has been going on since 2011. At the end of 2011 is when it was decided that there was going to be a decision to come up with a formal agreement in 2015 that'll take place in 2020. That's what's highlighted right there, and it's called out in the little box to the side. And this ADP text has been under negotiation since that time. In fact, this week, right now in Bonn, Germany, they are negotiating the ADP text. This is a draft from the co-chairs that came out just a little while ago on the 5th of October. So this draft text that I pulled some of these pieces from is only about 20 pages now. But last year at COP in Lima, it was about 100-some pages. Then in Geneva at the ADP session, it got down to like 80, 90. And then in Bonn in June, it got down a little bit more and went back up. So the co-chairs of the ADP actually took the draft text and got it down to 20 pages, and that's what they're negotiating right now in Bonn, Germany, and it's what will eventually go into Paris as part of the negotiation text. And so we hope that a lot of the things we see in the draft text will actually make it there. But the success of this, just the pillar number one, for there to be a successful agreement, is that the negotiators need to overcome what's called common but differentiated responsibilities with respective capabilities, and then they need to decide on this 1.5 or 2 degrees Celsius mark. Those are pretty much the big issues when it comes to having an agreement. The common but differentiated responsibilities just says that some nations have contributed more to the amounts of accumulated greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, and so therefore they have more responsibility. At the same time, other countries that are working on development need to have access to energy and other resources that could produce more greenhouse gases at a gross level or even on a per capita level, as developed countries need to be bringing their emissions down. So that's kind of a general statement. There are other aspects that go into this that are going to be going into the agreement, including technology transfer, other finance mechanisms, market mechanisms, capacity building, looking at loss and damage and resilience, some things I won't get into today. But that's a big hurdle. Typically, or how this was done before, is from a very top-down approach, meaning that at the UN COP meetings every year, there have been, this will be the 21st, but for the last 20, more or less, it's been a very top-down approach, meaning that the negotiators would come together and try to negotiate everything within one room, meaning targets and timelines, who has to reduce to what levels, what metrics are going to be used to measure those levels, and so forth and so on. And also, at what degree basis should we be looking at, a 1.5 or 2 degree? What's changed between then and now in these ADP negotiation sessions is that we're looking at more of a bottom-up agreement, which in that bottom-up agreement, it's going to include nationally determined contributions for mitigation and resilience. So instead of them being negotiated at the universal or international level, each country is now responsible for submitting their own contribution to the international community. So there's no form for how these international contributions are going to be made. There's no templates. There's nothing that says it has to be X, Y, and Z. It's up to each country to determine what it is they're willing to contribute. And of course, there are expectations for certain countries like the US or China or the EU to contribute a particular amount, while other countries and a lot of developing countries and small island states, do not necessarily have those expectations, but surprisingly, a number of them are doing way more above and beyond than what one might expect. But a couple of things to pull out of here. This is, again, the draft text that we were looking at earlier. It's a contribution, so they're still deciding whether or not it should be a commitment. They're calling them intended nationally determined contributions. So intended, okay. Contribution, is that legally binding or not? These are some of the questions that they still need to figure out in the actual, the final agreement. But they are supposed to be to a party's, meaning a country's, highest ambition. So every country should think about what they are capable of doing with the respective capabilities and give the best, the most aggressive contribution that they possibly can to help solve this global commons dilemma called climate change. So where are we at? The deadline for these contributions was October 1st. And this is an analysis, just one of many analyses that have been done. But this one in particular is done by a group called Climate Interactive. They consult with the U.S. Department of States. They consult with China and other entities on where they should be setting their INDCs. Some of this actual report, pieces of it, were mentioned in Jim Kim, president of the World Bank's speech during Climate Week. So, I mean, this is a very credible organization that did an analysis that said the current level of INDCs will get us not quite even halfway to where we need to go. So the top line is no action, business as usual. Current INDCs that have been submitted get us about 3.5. This is on the higher end. There are other analyses that say we're closer to 3, in the 2.7 to 3.1 range. But they take into different things into consideration. And again, we need to be down at the 2. So what some of those other things take into consideration is what the Climate Interactive, looks at these ratchets. Some of the pledges in the INDCs don't mention sustaining the pledge after, say, 2030. China, for example, said that they would peak their emissions, their gross emissions by 2030, but it doesn't say that they'll reduce them after, or if they're going to increase them with population or GDP and any other type of other type of measure. So what Climate Interactive does is give some scenarios of how we can actually get down to the 2 degrees. And I'll just focus on the very last one there that I call out because we want to get to the 2-degree path. We need these other things in place. But what we really need is then all that stuff and then still a reduction of 3.5% per year. In order to do that, there are no policy recommendations there. Those policies still need to be created, and that means we need the right policy and market signals to drive us to that 3.5% per year reduction. So that we can get to the 2-degree mark. And that's only 2 degrees. I mean, what if we think about what's going to happen at 1.5 degrees when it's possible that the atoll of Kiribati that spans the atoll, spans the geographic width of almost the entire United States, could be completely gone. A lot of small island states. So, I mean, there are security risks at going above the 1.5 degree mark. This is just to get us to the 2. So, what we're going to need to get those policy signals is a lot of pre-2020 climate action to drive up ambition. So the Paris Agreement with the INDCs, it doesn't go into effect until the year 2020. So between now and then, those INDCs are just kind of being worked out as far as how they're going to be implemented. They don't go into effect until 2020. And then we're not even sure what the trajectory is going to be after that. And we see that we need these ratcheting mechanisms in there. Maybe they'll be negotiated in 2020, but what's going to drive them? Again, the policy and market signals are going to drive them. It's a risk of reduction, the perception that other countries are going to be following suit in a way. And we don't have all of that right now. But the draft text, for the first time, calls out the importance of climate action pre the negotiations, pre the date in which the agreement would go into effect, and for the first time calls out the importance of non-party stakeholders. This is the private sector, financial institutions, cities, subnational governments. I'm just going to keep reading because it's great. Local communities, indigenous peoples. And this is to showcase the amounts and the breadth of climate action that's happening at the ground right now to be able to drive countries to have more ambition. And last year in Lima at the COP, the Peruvian presidency of the COP announced the Lima Paris Action Agenda, which is looking at bringing these non-party stakeholders into the fold so that they can have a voice or contribution to what states should be doing. And this is being done through the Nazca platform, I'll show you in just a minute, to be able to showcase these initiatives and make that voice louder, more clear, to drive action farther, faster, and there's still a lot more that can be done. So here's the Nazca portal. I just took some screenshots. I thought that this would be the easiest way to look at it. There's a lot already here, but there's a lot that's not yet captured. So I list 4,279 different climate actions through cooperative initiatives or through networks of actions. This is being with cities, companies, regions. That's a lot. That's a lot happening around the world. And then we could see the different, actually you probably can't see the small little box that is over there. But that shows the different sectors or different areas in which these climate actions are taking place. Energy efficiency, renewable energy, land use, resilience. It covers a whole different sphere that really is something that can speak to us. It's not about the international negotiations and what market mechanism they're going to put in place or the accounting rules behind it at the moment. But it really says that, you know, there are things going on just with renewable energy, for example, that we can all contribute to in a way from the different ways that we interact with our society. This is just an example of one of the cooperative initiatives. This is an initiative that's been launched by the French presidency, and it's just saying that there are some things that can be done for sustainable agriculture that also benefit agriculture in general, but also climate. When in 2050 the world's population is supposed to be around 9.4, 9.5 billion, that's a lot more food demand that we're going to have on our land. That land use also plays a role in climate change. So there are initiatives around to have joint cooperation across borders, across regions, across cities to come up with the right policies that we can showcase that says that there are actors doing something around the world on climate action and on sustainability that can then make or ask the national level governments to do something more. Here's cities. So right now, Nazca has 582 different cities that are linked together through one or more initiatives that are global in scale. Des Moines has one, which is fantastic. Compact of Mayors is a great initiative. It works on mitigation of greenhouse gases, resilience, and a couple other larger, broader initiatives. But then there's Minneapolis has 9. Which is great. A little healthy competition, right? I didn't find Iowa City in there, but not pointing fingers, I was going to put it on there if I could. But it's not because Iowa City isn't doing something. It's not because Decorah or Dubuque or other cities or Muscatine aren't doing something, but it's how do they showcase it? You know, if there is action that's happening somewhere on the ground here in Iowa City and it can be linked with other cities, they're similar in size, greater in size, in the U.S., outside of the U.S., and that can be added up in a way and showcased. It gives a better policy signal and market signal to Washington, D.C., to the negotiators in Paris, but there'll be further negotiations to ramp up ambition. It helps amplify these signals. And policymakers, and this is just in my opinion, not the view of the Stanley Foundation by any means, they're going to be making decisions based off the information that they have, right? So how do we show them that there's something happening at levels that they might not always be attuned to? Well, Nazca is a fantastic platform to be able to do this, be able to showcase it. And we only have 582 cities in here. I guarantee there are a lot more cities doing something in here that can be linked to initiatives and be showcased. So showcasing is one aspect of this. But linking to other initiatives, there's also an education component. So a city doesn't need to rebuild something. There are already lessons out there. There are already examples of way in which things work on the ground. And And like, for example, Minneapolis is working on 9 different things. That's not that far away. I mean, the communication there can't be all that difficult, even if you don't have the internet. So there are plenty of options to link more of the groundswell into the Nazca portal to be able to showcase it and drive more ambition. But in addition to just showcasing, there also needs to be a bit more of an aggregation aspect. We don't really know what all of this means. There are 4,279 actions or initiatives going on, 582 cities. What does that mean as far as driving that curve down? Or how much more ambition can that actually give state governments? Well, we don't exactly know yet. This is a very new thing. Like I was mentioning, it was just launched less than 12 months ago. But there have already been a number of reports that have come out through ECOFIS, UNEP, UN Environmental Program, Yale doing some reports that look at aggregating some of these initiatives. And they find that they're not able to actually aggregate that many because the criteria is not quite set for how you really determine the breadth or the depth rather of this. But of the small percentage they're able to aggregate, it shows that you could potentially drive that curve down by just another 30%, almost a third, which is fantastic. It means that there is something here. Yes, we need to have more measures around it, more ways to aggregate it, more ways to showcase it, more ways to get other countries that are not on that map involved. But there's a lot of potential there. And without having this in an aggregate form, what would we be taking to policymakers to say you can be more ambitious? Well, we can't do a whole lot unless we have something like this. And so it's fantastic to see that the international policy community is evolving to understand the role of non-state and subnational actors, the importance of cities, the importance of local communities. And that's huge. And it is starting to send the right signals. We just need more of them. So in addition to having more of the right signals, we also need a way for having climate action spread. Sure, we would like to have more cities. We'd like to have more businesses involved. We'd like to tie it to sustainable development so that those countries thinking about the common but differentiated responsibilities can look at it developing sustainably without a competitive disadvantage because they have some of these natural resources that they could use to develop, but they need finance and technology to be able to develop sustainably, and some capacity building as well to how to do the analysis and different things that a lot of companies and cities in different parts of the developed world have been doing. But I'll stop a little bit shy before jumping in the finance piece and say that there have also been some analyses on a per GDP and per GHG per capita basis of the number of climate actions happening around the world. And, on the gross level of climate actions, just the number, it's no surprise that the U.S. and the EU, a lot of the developed countries are leading the way. We have a lot of these networks in place. A lot of the cities are doing things already. But when you get down to the per GDP or per GHG basis, the developing countries are actually doing a lot more than we would think. So there's a lot going on. It still needs to be captured in Nazca, but there could be a lot more to be done. And finance is a key component to it. And so also in the draft agreement that we're expecting in Paris is a finance piece. And this finance piece started back also with the ADP around 2011, where there was a commitment by parties at the COP to provide $1 billion per year starting in 2020. So every year thereafter, $1 billion for mitigation efforts and resilience efforts. And as of today, that was the mechanism that would go through is called the Green Climate Fund. As of today, there's about $10 billion in pledges to the Green Climate Fund. But there are other avenues or other venues for for climate financing, and these sum up to somewhere about 35 billion in pledges, but through that, only about 2.6 have actually been dispersed for different projects. But one other component that Nazca is able to capture that a lot of these, larger analyses have not captured because they're about big development banks and big multilateral funds or state contributions, is that there's local financing that's also being provided. Green climate bonds, for example. Just in Nazca, I was able to pull up the Iowa Finance Authority that focuses on resilience and adaptation funding in the United States. There's a lot that's happening that is not really seen at the international level, and for the first time, we're going to be able to start to aggregate these things. So that's the flight path. To kind of sum up what's going to happen in Paris and the look beyond Paris, what's going to happen is we're going to have a landing of an agreement. There will be an agreement. We know that landing is going to have the nationally determined contributions. That's the second pillar. But we know that those contributions are not going to get us to 2 degrees. We already know that. I think there are probably going to be a lot of reports coming out around the Paris time that start saying things like Paris isn't giving us what we want. It's not going to get to 2 degrees. We've known this for a long time, actually. I'd say a number of months, the anticipation gets about halfway there. I'd say that it's going to get us about halfway there. But Paris also is an opportunity for us to take off. It's the after Paris point that is really going to matter, the après Paris. When we leave from Paris, we need to see more climate action. We need to see more climate action in the pre-2020 period. That's going to set the stage for having greater ambition for when states ratchet up their next set of nationally determined contributions. So, and then the last piece is that we need the finance to be able to make it happen. Climate action can only happen so much without having some of the finance and then some of the technology transfer that's necessary. But it is happening. And I think that in more of a prescriptive way is that as we start sending them these different policy signals, as Nazca becomes more evolved and we're able to do more aggregation with it and more learning from it and more orchestration of different actions through cities and businesses that can cooperate, as that is developing, we're also going to see that the international process is developing as well, or is evolving. So we will see policy changes in countries, but I think that what might be more surprising is that we're going to start to see some market policy changes or market changes with the incorporation of some cost on externalities, environmental externalities. We're already seeing a little bit of this or hints of it. But there is a growing amount of carbon markets, and they need the policy signals and the business signals from the ground up to say that it's going to be okay. Because all studies show that it actually is okay. There's not much carbon leakage, meaning that if you put a price on carbon in one place, then industry moves someplace else. It just isn't happening. There's not a strong correlation there. The effects of a carbon tax, for example, have not affected the community. I mean, the biggest argument around that is that, well, if you tax energy, then energy access, especially for those who are poor, will actually go down. The policies just have to be created in a way. And they have in places like British Columbia, where a lot of those funds are actually given directly back to folks within the communities, and especially with assistance programs for poorer communities in the way that so that they can have the energy access they need. In fact, a lot of studies show that they're even better off. So it would not surprise me that what was once kind of a bad word or a dirty word in the U.S. not that many years ago called carbon pricing will be back on the stage come after Paris. That's going to be a necessary market mechanism for driving a lot more ambition. And it ties really directly into what's happening already around the world. A lot of cities are being more competitive because they're focused on climate change. Businesses are being more competitive because they're focused on climate change. And societies and local communities are healthier, just public health issues. This is the direction in which we're going to continue to go. And it's becoming a race to the top almost. So on this race to the top, there are currently over 30 jurisdictions, state or countries that have a price on carbon, and 20-some subnational jurisdictions that have a price on carbon, and it's looking to expand. Not what was once before seen in a bad way. It is now actually seen in a way to the race to the top, because companies are asking for these different signals. Cities are already moving in that direction, and I think that those who are not moving in this direction are going to be the ones that are going to be left behind. So I do have just a couple resources here. The COP21 website, I highly recommend taking a look at it. It explains everything from the process to, where to look at for some of the draft agreement issues. You can take a virtual tour of what the site's going to be like at Le Bourget. There's the Green Climate Fund, if you would like to track where that's going. We have 10% of what we're going to need as far as pledges over the next 5 years. So we have a lot more to go with the Green Climate Fund. And then last is this organization that I would say it's more of an informal organization. I'm on the steering committee of this as well. It's called Galvanizing, the Groundswell of Climate Actions. There are a lot of resources on there that look at the link between what's happening with cities and businesses and regions to the formal process, how they communicate to one another, and also what should be happening after Paris. Not just with Nazca, but the formalization of some type of secretariat role to continue bringing the action agenda into the formal process. But I think that we're right about on time. I could probably keep talking, but should we have some questions?
So I'll start with the question, how does the U.S. stand to date on contributions? And I'd like to expand that question to, if you could please describe to us U.S. leadership and the preparations for this conference or on climate change issues internationally more generally. And then the second part of the question from the audience, how does Russia, China, and India stand on contributions to date?
So really good questions, and unfortunately I won't be able to go into depth on these because they have submitted their INDCs. There's a portal that you can go to on the UNFCCC's websites that actually lists all of the INDCs. As far as the contributions and where they stand, I would say that the U.S. and China have both delivered what was around what was expected, and they've been engaging with each other to even ramp those up a little bit more. And so for a good example is that both the U.S. and China had already released their INDCs, and then it was just in September that China said that they're going to have a national price on carbon in 2017. That was not included in the original INDCs. So we will hopefully see a little bit more of this race to the top, if you will, and going back and forth. But I think that they were about what was expected, and we do hope that they'll be ratcheted up a little bit more. I'm not familiar, so I can't really speak about Russia's INDC in particular, or that much of India's. But I think that, from my understanding, India's INDC has also been what was about expected course, we had hoped that there'd be a little bit more. I think maybe in the news you might have seen that they're planning on planting, I think, so you can't quote me for sure, but about 2 billion trees along the highways, which I think was one of the highlights that came out of that. But they would definitely fall into the category of wanting to have energy access as a key component of development. So I wouldn't expect too much on the ambitious side of mitigation reductions yet. But
how much is population stabilization or reduction considered in reducing climate change? Isn't it a major factor?
It is. In the slide that was talking about the cooperative initiative on agriculture, also mentioned that in by 2050, projected that population will be about 9.5 billion around the world. 9.4, I think, is what it was. We also have to think of all of the emerging economies, the amount of the GDP growth that is great, is necessary. It should be encouraged, but without doing that sustainably or with the right plan, a lot of infrastructure for growth can be put in place now, even in this pre-2020 period. And if that infrastructure to grant more energy access or for other things that are very resource intensive, think of also cement. Cement has a really high carbon footprint. But a lot of the infrastructure and things used and resources used for development can be done more sustainably or can be done as business as usual. And so that's why we really need to focus on linking climate change and sustainable development. They're actually the same side of the same coin. And that can be done even further by showing what's happening on the ground level with actual climate actions. When it comes to a lot of development decisions, it's not at the national level. It's at the regional, the sub-regional, the state, the county, the city, the towns level for making a lot of these development decisions. And so the more that we can have sort of the groundswell being showcased and have lessons learned and the orchestration of these different climate actions tied with sustainable development, the better off the world is going to be as we continue to grow both population-wise and economically.
There are two questions that are asking a follow-up about carbon pricing or carbon tax. Could you provide some examples that suggest that the U.S. Congress will support carbon taxing in any form? And then another question, could you comment on carbon tax versus cap and trade, pro and con?
Oh. Great. You guys are taking it easy on me, huh? Yeah, I'll address the U.S. question first, and I'll put in with the caveat that I'm here with the Stanley Foundation, but the Stanley Foundation just works on global issues, so we don't do anything on domestic issues, and we don't have an official opinion on any domestic issues. So I'll just give you my personal kind of opinion on where that sits. Based on my experience before joining the foundation, I also did a lot of sustainability consulting for major corporations. Back in the day when Waxman Markey was, on the Congress floor, I was doing sustainability analyses for a lot of and scenario analyses for a lot of multinational corporations. What if this actually goes through? What if we have a price on carbon? And it didn't go through. The likelihood that something goes through Congress on carbon pricing in the near future is actually very, very small. We wouldn't expect to see that at the national level. There have been talks with the EPA new clean power regulations as far as compliance with that states that do not submit their action plans to comply with the EPA regulation might see a price on carbon. That would be another part of the regulatory component of the EPA, but I can't say that that's going to happen or if it should happen or anything like that, but that's just kind of what I know. However, we do have a price on carbon in the United States in certain jurisdictions. California has a price on carbon. Their carbon market is linked to the Quebec carbon market. We see in the Western region, there are carbon pricing components already under play. In the Northeast, we have RGGI, which is a regional greenhouse gas carbon market. So there are, in the U.S., we do see a price on carbon. California is probably one of the best examples because California itself is one of the world's largest economies, and they seem to be doing really well because it is a really well thought out carbon pricing scheme. And then we also see, that what happened in the EU with the EU ETS, there was a lot of learning, or ETS is emissions trading scheme. There was a lot of learning to be done in that type of cap and trade. So if you ask the question whether a tax is better or whether cap and trade is better, it depends on how they're implemented. And I know that's kind of like skirting my way out of the question, but it really does. For example, if you're going to have a cap and trade system, if you give away free allowances, which is what businesses might want to, especially those who have high carbon emissions, then you're really kind of getting them off the hook for a little while. Whereas if you have an actual tax, it's direct. The other difference is if you have an actual tax, then you have revenue generation. That revenue generation can be funneled into other things. For example, energy access for those under a certain income level, for renewable energy projects, to innovation projects that could be done on a cooperative basis internationally. Whereas a carbon market, the only way, more or less, that you bring in revenue is to auction the allowances. So then at what point do you actually generate that revenue, and how often are you able to do so? However, a market, for those who think that markets find the nice equilibrium that they're supposed to, will do a bit of ebb and flow with the economy as well, and helping to get to a certain target, whereas a tax doesn't always have that. I could continue on this for a little while, but hopefully that'll suffice.
So I'm going to exercise the prerogative of the chair, even though I'm not the chair. I'm the questioner. But it seems to me that there's been a good deal of change and even creativity in approaching these questions at the international level. Kyoto was sort of a top-down approach, and now we have a bottom-up approach. And I wonder if we can identify who should get the credit for this creativity and this breakthrough that seems to be very promising.
Thanks. Another great question, not the easiest one. Who would get the credit? Well, I would say there are a lot of actors that deserve some recognition there, but it would be very difficult to pinpoint who. In fact, I think the circumstances, in a way, is what drove us to get there. But I would say that there was a lot of innovative thinking that happened by the COP presidency in Mexico, as well as the COP presidency in South Africa, for leading us into some new directions. And those COPs fell immediately after the Copenhagen COP in 2009. Copenhagen in 2009 was a time when the Kyoto Protocol was supposed to be, we'll just use the word revamped. So the Kyoto Protocol was the first international treaty on climate change, of which the U.S. was not a signatory to, and it also did not have targets or timelines for mitigation for developing countries. It separated the world into annexes. And so the Kyoto Protocol did have did deliver some climate action. There was some emissions reductions in the EU, but it really wasn't enough to handle the world's emissions, and it was leading us still on that 4.5 degree track. So there needed to be a new arrangement new signatories or even a new agreement. And it was expected that that was going to happen in Copenhagen, and bringing in developing countries into the fold, into the targets and timelines. And what happened is the negotiations went, and they have a 2-week period for the COP. And then the heads of state showed up at the very end, and there was no solution. So the heads of state just kind of knocked out an agreement called the Copenhagen Accord, which said that they would all continue to pursue finding some type of agreement that would lead us to a safe climate world. So there was a commitment to have a future commitment. They just didn't know when that was going to happen. But in Mexico, a lot of things at the Cancun COP, a lot of well, I would say it took a downturn from what happened in Copenhagen. There was a lot of negativity toward international climate change negotiations and policy after Copenhagen, and what happened in Cancun, it turned it back up as much as it could. And then what we had at the COP in South Africa is whenever we also looked at this new timeline for setting an agreement in 2015. So between then and now, there have been a lot of actors that have been working toward building this bottom-up approach. But the bottom-up approach, had been somewhat silent for a while. There were a lot of other attempts to still try to frame it in this top-down, and it just didn't work. A lot of academics chimed in, a lot of negotiators chimed in, and I would say from the academic point of view, it's the Nash equilibrium of actors with varying interest without one actor wanting to make a unilateral move because they would lose marginal benefit from it. And so it just got locked into this Nash equilibrium, or what some people call a gridlock. And if we want to solve climate change, which is a global commons problem, we can't do it in gridlock. So there had to be a different way to do it. And there was a lot of innovative thinking about that. But I think a lot of it definitely goes to the different COP presidencies over the years. The UN Climate Change Secretariats, Christiana Figueres, the executive secretary of the Climate Change Secretariat, has done a lot with that. And then the UN Executive Office of the Secretary General and their climate change support team has helped shape this a lot as well. So I think that those were some of the big moments and big actors.
Please join me in thanking Todd Edwards one more time.